Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, April 7th, 2021. Still 2021. Just double checking. And I stayed up way too late last night, and I have no one but myself to blame. But if anyone would like to volunteer to take the blame, please let me know via Twitter. I'll happily blame you instead. One of those major league time wasters that you can fall into. Family tree stuff. Happened to stumble on, I don't know what we were doing yesterday, that we happened to stumble upon some information that led to this and led to that, and said, hey, I wonder if I can find on the internet. And guess what? You can find them on the internet. And what were we doing? Project. Yeah, that's right. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, I guess it involved finding the history of one ancestor or another, and I think their service in the military and various wars. And anyway, it set off a whole chain reaction. And we were running around checking things out all over the place, and that made me stay up late. I can't drop it when I'm reading. Oh, this is fascinating, and this person's fascinating, and whatever happened to, and do I have any, and are they still alive? And there's some great resources out there, but they will eat your hours, that's for sure. Okay. Well, some interesting news. It also led me to something else completely random today. One of the people involved in that I turned up in the search. I don't know whether they have it right or not. I think there might have been some confusion in the name here, but there was some suggestion that one of these people might have had a career in early Hollywood at some point. And checking that out, I still haven't established exactly the connection. And people were a little loose and weird with their names back then. And, your name is, people went by their middle names. There's all sorts of craziness out there. But anyway, without explaining the connection, because I'm not sure I can, I landed on IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, and I was looking for the name, and I'm in the wrong place. I found the wrong person with that name at a much later date, much later point in time, and I happened to stumble across a IMDb entry for a movie that I think, I don't know whether, maybe Greg Dworkin and I should sit down and review the movie. It is, it's a family show here, but the name of the movie, this is oddly specific, is David French is a Piece of S and I Want Him Dead. And it's not the David, it's funny to you and me it's funny to everybody because that's a hell of a title for a movie. But, as you know, David French is, he's like a conservative commentator and pundit, and I think he briefly considered running for president as a never-Trump Republican at some point, and he's not like my favorite guy or anything, but I wouldn't put him on the list as he's a piece of S and I want him dead. Kind of a piece of S, but, I don't mind if he continues to mind his own business and live. That's fine. I'm not sure whether he's aware of the movie or not. I don't know if anybody's aware of this movie, but it was released in 2020. And in case you're interested, the plot summary here is up-and-coming rock band Bad Penny are doing their first headline tour, but they have a problem. The support band French Kiss, fronted by the charming David French, is becoming more popular. I guess more popular than they are. We could see the full summary, but wouldn't that be a waste of time if we did that? Anyway, David French, as we know, not the head of a touring rock band, but I don't know. I found that was an oddly specific gut punch kind of a title, and it's got me interested. And so maybe we should screen it on the show here. And I don't know. Does Greg, do you, I'll ask Greg when he gets here if he communicates at all with David French. And is he aware of this film? You'd think if it has your name on it, you might be aware of it, but it's only been out, I don't know, a year. So anyway, that was kind of an interesting way to start the morning. I wasn't expecting that. But I should have expected something ridiculous to start the morning when I'm up at all hours, looking all over the internet and whatever. Okay, so Greg, I think, is signaling he's about ready to come on. Now, this has got him motivated. But, he talks to David French. And no, you've never seen the movie. Is that right? Good morning, Greg.
Yeah, I've never seen I never heard of the movie.
Well,
I definitely communicate with David French. That's pretty funny.
He should know, I think, that
he's probably aware.
He might be, and if he isn't,
Matt Gertz over at Media Matters, is aware of this congressman that has a similar name.
Right. And I don't know. I feel like as a favor to him, I don't owe him any favors or anything, but you should tell him. There's
also lawyer Josh Chaffetz, who I follow on Twitter, is aware of another congressman, former congressman who had a similar name.
Well, we should just make a series of movies.
Who's very empathetic about what Matthew Gertz goes through every day.
I can understand it. Now, I think we should maybe turn it into a series. And all of them, it's just simply for us to release movies that say people we don't like are pieces of S and we want them dead. But no, in this movie, he's somebody else. He just happens.
Besides, in this day of age, you can't go ahead and want people dead because people will come visit you with, earpieces and sunglasses and say, "Can we speak? Can we talk?"
Right, but I can just point to the film and simply say, "I am simply an art critic. It's not that I really want this to happen."
Yeah, well, that's good.
I was even against it in the movie.
But you do want Donald Trump hung.
Sure, right. Donald Trump wants Donald Trump hung, I think.
Well,
think about it just right. Yeah, okay. Right, and I don't know which one I mean either, so maybe both. Who knows? And I could be. All right.
But did you want him hung or hanged? I mean, it really matters.
Right, it does. I mean, that's why I think I can get Donald Trump to agree if I'm careful. And sign my order.
Yeah,
and
I suppose.
See if
I'm
we can
hung
get
up
it done.
on this.
Yeah. Well, he's got the same hang up.
Right. So switching topics completely. There's so many stories in the news. It's actually an amazing news day for a Wednesday.
Yeah.
It feels like Friday afternoon and all the stuff got dumped.
Huh.
But
what's first?
Of course, the Derek Chauvin trial is continuing, and the attempt to put George Floyd on trial is continuing. So that's background for everything. And the situation in Georgia continues as the Republicans try to change the topic. And for all of that, the big story this morning appears to be what's the definition of infrastructure, because Beltway reporters have a memory of about 48 hours.
Fruitful.
And the fact that there was a insurrection and a pandemic and, this trial is going on, and COVID relief passed and it was a huge big deal and everybody's benefiting from it and it's really popular. And, never mind that. What's the definition of infrastructure? Because the Republicans from Kristi Noem on, certainly through Mitch McConnell, are saying, hey, wait a minute. Your incredibly popular, probably going to be passed infrastructure bill isn't really about infrastructure. Let's make that the story.
Okay, something, reconciliation, whatever. All right.
Right, but, you can make it a process story
if
you want. But what they want to do is say, look, infrastructure is only roads and bridges.
Sure, of course.
Because the internet didn't exist in the Eisenhower era, and when they did infrastructure, they did roads and bridges. And that's what we have to do from now on because we're conservative and you only look backwards, you never look forward.
Right. Now,
internet be damned. And Kristi Noem said, hey, what's this pipes? The only thing that goes through pipes is water. Well, one might argue that toxic waste in Florida is part of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Because the lining underneath the water is broken. I grew up in New York City where 100-year-old water mains burst all the time. It's under the city. I had to dig up the street to get to it. It was infrastructure as opposed to the superstructure of the skyscrapers. So, what's the definition of infrastructure? It's the electric grid. We wind up losing power all the time in Connecticut. Longtime listeners know we have a generator for that reason. I mean, the whole idea that none of this stuff is infrastructure, it's only roads, is dumb.
Yes. Well,
and
tell me Texas doesn't want
to
that
go with it. Because Republicans said so. Therefore, that's the big controversy of the day. And forget about everything that's going on in America. The real issue is how do you define infrastructure? And the answer is infrastructure is the stuff that makes your life better. Okay? That's all it is. Pass it. It'll be popular. And then you're going to get stuck on some other thing that you're going to complain about that is equally popular. We already know that. The voting bill is coming up. Although all in good order, first things first, infrastructure first. And we know that the voting bill is so popular And taking dark money out of politics is so popular that the Koch brothers and other lobbyists behind the scenes are saying you can't fight it head on. You have to go procedural because these things are too popular with the public. We'll get clobbered. Is that infrastructure?
Right.
I don't know. It's
yes.
political infrastructure.
Yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, look, at this point, now I want to just declare everything infrastructure to own the, who do we own? Conservatives, but we need a shorthand. Own the, I don't know. What are they? Nothing compares to libs. They're just. I
don't know. I mean,
I own them. So
it's hard. It's hard to think like them.
Yeah.
Because they make no sense whatsoever. So they're really stuck in so many different ways. Interestingly, Jonathan Chait has a piece about this in New York Magazine.
Jonathan Chait is a piece of S.
Mitch McConnell and the agony of the post-Trump corporate Republican, and goes on to talk about the fact that it is difficult because this isn't hypocrisy on McConnell's part. At least this one thing isn't hypocrisy on McConnell's part.
What?
And that is that he has made, for his entire career, opposing campaign finance reform.
Yes, true.
Right. He believes
Oh, yeah.
that campaign finance reform is a dangerous restriction on political speech and you can't do it.
Right.
And especially don't restrict political speech by businesses. Corporations and people too, my friend.
Yeah. That was the other guy. But still, yes. That's always
but
money is
Romney
speech.
Was only Mitt Romney, who said that, was only articulating what Republicans think.
Yes, absolutely. McConnell is responsible for the money is speech line of whatever the hell you would call it.
Yeah, and greed is good,
really
right?
Thought,
so,
yeah.
as Jonathan Chait points out, Obama's memoir casually describes McConnell as lacking any strong convictions beyond an almost religious opposition to any version of campaign finance reform.
Yes.
Okay, and you were there. You worked with him, from a distance.
He was near me. I don't know. Okay.
And he was like that. He is like that. And yet, last Monday, says Chait, here was McConnell treating the spectacle of business leaders engaging in political debate as a stark threat to be extinguished.
A piece
the
of S.
provocation was a series of corporate statements denouncing Republican-sponsored voting restrictions, which McConnell described as a coordinated campaign by powerful and wealthy people to mislead and bully the American people. Can you imagine that?
That is ridiculous. I want to put an end to this.
Yeah. The next day, after reiterating his warning to corporations to stay out of politics except for your donations.
Stay in your lane.
Yeah, stay in your lane. Just give money to us.
Right.
Right? And so Chait writes, there's more at work here than the latest cynical turn of the wheel. McConnell is acting not only out of calculation, but a mix of fear and rage. And we're going to talk about fear and rage a lot because that's a modern Republican Party that is enveloping segments of the right that believe they had come through the Trump era unscathed. For a certain class of establishment Republican, the events surrounding Georgia's voting restrictions have set off a mental crisis more severe than anything they experienced during the previous 4 years.
Really?
From the standpoint of the Republican elite, the Trump presidency was an unpleasant period during which they were beset on all sides by impossible demands. To the right, Trump's most ardent cultists disdained them as country club insiders.
Okay.
And to their left, the media, liberals, never-Trumpers, and perhaps their neighbors and younger family members, and all human beings, I would add, dismissed them as little Eichmanns working alongside a monster. What were they supposed to do? Impeach the man? Vote against tax cuts they believed would help the economy? It was also unreasonable.
Yes, all right.
Right? And then finally, the insurrection made them snap, and even Mitch McConnell, after the fact, said nasty things about Trump. And then they decided that voter suppression laws were the way out because all Republicans could gather about that. Sure. The MAGA people, because they think the election was stolen. The establishment Republicans, because even though they know it's a big lie, it helps them win elections. And so he found a unifying theme, and it was going to be voter suppression rule. And now, part of his base, corporate America, is turning on him for the very thing that he decided was going to unite everybody. So now he's frustrated, and that's why he's having so much of an issue.
Well, all right, I can accept that. That's nicely argued.
Right. Between his blustery threats of retribution against his erstwhile corporate allies, McConnell sounds almost plaintive. Republicans drink Coca-Cola, and we fly. We like baseball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all right.
You prick us, do we not bleed?
I don't know. Let's find
Perhaps
out.
he should try a little more introspection as to just how it came to pass that formerly anodyne corporate value statements like voting is good and racism is bad turned into divisive markers of partisanship.
That's you're in a bad place.
Right? You're in a bad place when voting is good. Oh, that's horrible. It's totally partisan
Can't
to say that.
for sure. Right.
So it's
people
pretty
vote, we
amazing.
don't want them
So
to.
on the one hand, you have the Republican Party. Tom Edsall kind of sums it up with another piece about emailing political scientists. He does that once a week. The fear that is shaping American politics, it affects everybody from Joe Manchin to Joe Biden. False or not, the white minority prediction has become a dominant political narrative that if you look at schools, it's majority minority, particularly insofar as Republicans exploit this characterization. And in the process, this framing has become a central element in the worldview of many conservative whites.
Right.
So basically, whether you're looking at Josh Krasauer at National Journal or other political scientists or certainly conservatives who are trying to make the voting issues of against Black Lives Matter or whether or not economic anxiety was really driving things. It wasn't. It was racism. This is all central to what's going on here. And some people can talk about it and some people can't. They don't feel comfortable. So here's a weird side take on that. A noted political scientist wrote an article in the New York Times, which is by Robert Pape, political scientist. Fears of white people losing out permeate Capitol rioters' towns, study finds. Counties with the most significant declines in the non-Hispanic white population were the most likely to be homes to people who stormed the Capitol. So it wasn't economic anxiety at all.
What?
Those people who got in their little planes and flew down here and then complained that they were being hassled afterwards, and that's not what they expected after they climbed the walls of the Capitol, literally.
Why not?
You'd really have to be living on some other planet to find this came as a surprise. But that's what he wrote. He wrote, I didn't expect this, but when I looked, it turned out economic anxiety isn't really the issue here.
Oh, my God.
Oh, my gosh.
Unbelievable.
Now, his study's flawed in a lot of ways. Probably the major flaw is he's looking at the records of people who were arrested.
Yeah.
And then finding out where they lived and what their towns were like and trying to make a correlation between changing demographics and fear that drove you to be in the Capitol. The problem with that, it's a self-selected group. You're looking at people who the Capitol Police decided to arrest, and that doesn't mean it was representative of everybody there. Just one example of
I guess that's a possibility. Sure.
Don't jump to too many conclusions here. But the idea that he was surprised by it is the interesting part. What motivated insurrection? A study finds counties with most significant declines in the non-Hispanic white population are the most likely to produce insurrectionists. Controlling for population, distance to D.C., unemployment, and urban-rural location, given the caveat that you're only looking at people who were arrested, and that wasn't random.
I would suggest it's kind of a dumb study, actually.
Well,
But all right, he did it.
So he had a bad day with everybody saying, hey, are you not aware of what's been going on in the last 2 or 3 years?
Yeah.
The New York Times had an article saying studies show that it's not economic anxiety. They date back 3 years.
Yeah, it's already been done, guys.
Right.
Yeah,
already
sure.
So anyway, on the one hand, you have that fear motivating the Republican Party, and that's motivating what's going on in Georgia. And by the way, parenthetically, Nate Cohn has a really lovely piece here. Georgia's new law and the risk of election subversion, a reminder from a January phone call that the reform bill by congressional Democrats may not have the proper protections.
Yes.
Once Georgia passed their law, once the corporation started saying we're boycotting, moving the All-Star game to Denver. And by the way, a Morning Consult poll came out last night showing that the majority of avid baseball fans approve of the decision, like upwards of 60%. So everybody lecturing you about how this was going to backfire
on TV.
It's going to backfire on them. Yeah. So again, this whole thing that, you have to understand, Georgia understands, and you libs don't get this, that America's basically racist and they'll vote with us. And so making this a central issue and not allowing Biden to run on economic issues, but rather run on cultural issues, and culture war is how we win. you're all missing this. And so everything that happens that's bad is just feeding into our secret plans to win back the House in 2022 and the White House in 2024. And you keep going with the idea that Biden is somehow passing popular things and that's going to help him. Ha, ha, ha.
Well.
And I'm looking at that and thinking, well, actually, it will.
I mean, traditionally.
And baseball fans really do want some justice here. And you know what? Derek Chauvin might, in fact, have done what people say he did.
Well, he did do that. The only question
whether he's convicted or not is another story. Again, you have to prove intent here, and that's part of the problem. But maybe it's like unfolding the way we think it's unfolding. We're looking at the same stuff. We're not seeing information saying that voter suppression is in fact the best thing in the world, and American voters are flocking to voter suppression because that's what they want. Elected officials want it because they fear for losing their power. Again, fear is motivating the Republican Party. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how the public sees it. And they're assuming it is because, like, everybody knows. Everybody knows that crime is something we could use because Democrats are weak on crime, and it's going to help us win the election in 2020, except it didn't. Those caravans are going to win because they always won. They helped Ed Gillespie get to be governor, and they're going to help Donald Trump remain as president because everybody's afraid of immigration. Well, that's not how it worked either.
They have been wrong.
And you can't be for economic issues because economic issues never do anything. But that was the motivating factor for Latinos and Hispanics in the last election.
Anxiety,
not the, it really was economic anxiety for them. So all these analysts just need to get out a little bit. They got everything backwards. And the Beltway people who write about this take all of their cues. I'm talking about the Politicos and the Punch Bowls and the Axioses of the world. Take all their cues from the Republicans, and just because McConnell says something, that is the gospel, and therefore that's the way it's going to turn out. And that's in fact not the case at all. McConnell often screws up, and he often gets stuff wrong. And what's fascinating about all of this is that it's just so retro. Perry Bacon has a nice story here in 538 about how and why the Republican Party isn't rebranding after 2020. They're just recycling the same old things that, by the way, they lost with.
Well, I don't know. The autopsy thing was a joke the last time they did it, and I guess they feel like they'll be too obvious.
They're not going to do that, but I'm not just talking about a intellectual review of what happened and why we should change. It's let's look at their policies.
No.
Right?
All right. Where are they?
They're not changing. Whatever they did in 2020, they're doubling down on, including supporting Trump. And part of the core arguments about what they're doing and why. In fact, again, another sidebar, which is so interesting. I said there's a whole lot of stories floating around there. One that I don't have my fingertips on, but I looked at in passing about, I think it was Mike Gerson in the Washington Post, about how they have to make Tony Fauci the villain. Because that's the only way you could rehab Trump, by saying I ignored Fauci and Birx, and that was good. And the only way that's good is Fauci's bad.
Yes.
Right? So you see a lot of that, again, trying to play the pandemic down, when in fact the pandemic was central to everything. So they're doubling down on that. They're doubling down on the big lie that the election was stolen. They're doubling down on support for Trump. They're doubling down on trying to get rid of Republicans, censure them or take power away from them, like in the case of Brad Raffensperger and Secretary of State in Georgia. Again, Nate Cohen's story is it's not so much the whether or not you get food and water when you're online. It's the insidious nature of trying to make sure that the Secretary of State and nonpartisan, or at least equally bipartisan, commissions and areas that would normally look at elections now become way more partisan under the Republican legislature. That's what's changing the election. And you can't even comment on that in terms of, well, on paper, this looks fair, because the intent is bad. And therefore,
Yes.
it's a bad faith argument when you're trying to steal power and suppress a group of people to say, well, it was written cleverly enough so that on paper it sounds reasonable, when in fact it's how it's administered that's the problem, not what the words say.
Yeah. I mean, part of the problem is you're never going to get away with this following it up so closely on the heels of a very obvious and now publicly known effort to steal the election in exactly the same way.
Yeah, I mean, why are they doing it? It's because of that. That's what I mean about they haven't changed.
Yes.
So
well, that's true. They haven't had time to change.
A core thing is there's a number of reasons why they haven't changed. One is the party's core activists don't want to.
Right.
I mean, the party's perfectly happy being racist and
yes.
White supremacist.
Yeah, and they're anti-everything, and if you said that historically this has been a problem for the party, they would say, history schmistery, I like it, so it wouldn't matter.
Well, part of their history is their interpretation, right? On the one hand, Trump is still a force in the party, and on the other hand, they almost won.
Yeah.
And if you almost won, then you didn't really lose. Because if you just do these other things, then you would have votes.
Right. If they just find the votes, then you didn't lose after all. Just like he actually didn't win the first election, but the Electoral College bails him out of it.
Right. Well, you know the old psychiatrist joke, right?
I don't know.
How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb?
I don't know. It depends on how you feel.
But the light bulb needs to want to change.
Yeah, okay. Now I remember that one.
Right?
Okay.
The party doesn't want to change. There's 5 different ways you can look at it. Forces within the party. Trump is still there. Republican voters aren't clamoring for change. The elites aren't clamoring for change. The activists aren't. They don't want to change. That's why they're doing what they're doing.
Okay. Is there any way we could pay them to clamor? Might that work? We'll find out after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I gave ourselves an assignment before the break, and we talked about something else, and I forget what it was. So it wasn't serious anyway. That assignment was a piece of S, and I want it dead. So anyway, I can't recall what we were going to carry over to this side, but it doesn't matter. There's too much else
we were talking about hate and loathing and fear and how the Republican Party doesn't want to change. And by the way, Matt Gaetz.
That?
So the other side of the coin is what Trump didn't do, Biden is doing. Here's a piece in Washington Monthly by Bill Scher. I always read Bill Scher pieces, even when I like to argue with him about his conclusions. This one is, with infrastructure, can Biden win just by going big? A new ruling from the Senate parliamentarian helps avoid an infrastructure filibuster, but it's hardly definitive, and it may not be enough to galvanize left, right, and center Democrats. What he's saying is that this is going to be hard. It's not easy to put together something that everybody agrees on. Even Joe Manchin is likely to argue with the rest of the Democrats about what infrastructure really is, but it's a question of what benefits West Virginia as much as anything else.
Infrastructure is defined as things that happen in West Virginia.
And yet, just because it's hard doesn't mean it can't be done. And the idea of keeping left, right, and center Democrats together is hard, but certainly not impossible. And in fact, it's happening. It happened with the COVID bill, which I think was even harder to put together.
I would think so. Yeah.
Right? Will going big work out so well every time? Infrastructure poses a more complicated test, he writes. Already we've learned that when you go big, others can go bigger. Biden called his $2.3 trillion 8-year infrastructure American Jobs Plan big and bold, but that hasn't stopped the Congressional Progressive Caucus in crafting its own $10 trillion 10-year plan. It's important that they do that, says Joe Manchin can take stuff out and say, see, I'm a moderate guy. That's fine.
Sure, right.
It actually plays right into Biden's hands if they do that.
Yeah.
If the game is to secure 50 Democratic Senate votes and pass infrastructure through reconciliation, then Democrats need to appease nearly everybody in the caucus despite initial fissures. But what if this time Democrats need 60?
Okay.
While no one can be precisely sure how the Senate parliamentarian will interpret the reconciliation rules, although there's another story that they're interpreting it just the way Chuck Schumer wants.
Yeah.
Several budget analysts have cautioned the rules may forbid significant portions of the infrastructure plan from being immune to a filibuster. For a wonky rundown of how this works, read this primer from Jeff Davis at the Eno Center for Transportation. But as a general matter, reconciliation provisions must be budgetary. And as Politico's Sam Mintz reported, that means Democrats may not have limitless power to create new infrastructure programs in reconciliation. Even though the Senate parliamentarian ruled on Monday Democrats can pass bills more frequently. That doesn't mean that you can pass this specific bill or this specific item.
The Byrd rule is still there, is what he means.
Right. So the last time some Republicans made a counteroffer, Biden concluded the bid was too low, but Biden will likely have to engage in more robust negotiation to pass his jobs plan than his rescue plan. Last month's relief bill was legislated lightning fast in a crisis, and obstacles can be overcome. But for Biden to sign anything resembling the size and scope of what he's proposed, he'll have to summon all the political wisdom he's accumulated over the years. Okay, fine, summon it. In fact, the Engineering Society for America, whose name and acronym I don't have at my fingertips either, basically said we need $4 trillion to fix everything, and you're offering $2. Okay, fine. We'll do what we can do, and we'll get what we can get. But in that regard, doesn't seem like that big.
No, but you'll need all your something political experience, which again, that's the job description of serving in the Senate for 1 billion years and then becoming vice president and then president. Like that's,
it's not easy. Not everybody can do it. But when you pull it together, people say, "Oh, you're really good at this." Nancy Pelosi, for example. Christopher Catalago writes in Politico, Biden wants to cement a governing majority. His Build Back Better bill is his plan to do it. Notice that because things are seemingly on their way to getting passed, seemingly on their way to passage, reporters are no longer complaining about they don't like the name. Oh. Remember that was a thing for 24 hours? Build Back Better. What a stupid slogan. Well, he won on it, and he's implementing it. What do you say to that? Crime and economic anxiety, and Republicans don't like it.
Yeah. Well, if they don't like it.
Yeah, that's the point. Republicans don't like it. And the whole reason they don't like it is it's going to work and it's popular.
Yeah. Well,
it's the same reason they didn't like Medicare.
Okay. I don't know what the... No, I don't remember. Thankfully, I'm glad I don't remember, but I guess now I'm reminded that reporters would sit around saying they don't like the title of the bill. So therefore, I don't know. I don't know what all the pessimism is about, but...
Well, but here's these two back-to-back stories. Biden wants to cement a governing majority.
Yeah,
and the other one is Chuck Schumer's thinking big, gridlock Senate be damned. Senate majority leader said Democrats' current opportunity comes around maybe twice a century. So basically... Biden and Schumer are looking at these bills and saying, we're going to pass these. And it's not necessarily going to have the exact same form as when we first proposed it, but it'll be close, and we'll be okay with that.
Well, yeah. I mean, all right. So far, that's like what happens in legislatures.
Right, exactly.
What else?
And so, you see this being huge stories because, reporters don't have scoops. There's no leaks. They're getting frustrated that there isn't a press conference every 15 minutes. There's no tweeting that they can say, oh, my gosh, I'm going to write a story just based on this tweet. And now they have to dig deep and get their policy chops back, and they're not happy about
content. Yeah, I guess. So, I mean, it's not a bad story. He's going to have to call on all his faculties. Okay, good. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Should do that.
Good. Let us know how it works. In the meantime,
I guess he's set up for a big story about what a great operator he is when it passes, as I guess most people really should bet it will. So maybe that's not such a bad thing. I guess we'll see a Bill Scher piece that says Biden's a genius. Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Okay. I'm not worried. Should I be worried? That stops you.
Marjorie Taylor Greene is raising gobs of money. That's the Republican Party. Should be a little worried about that. But that doesn't mean that it's a majority. So that's the background behind all the infighting in Washington. When you read a story about how Biden can't get Republican votes, it's because they're afraid to give him, again, Republicans are the party of fear. They're afraid to give him votes because then people will think Democrats got things done, and that will not help them regain power. So they're going back to the let's just be Dr. No here, as Mitch McConnell called himself, and let's just say no to anything Biden wants to do, just the way we said anything that Obama wanted to do, we're going to say no, because it's, 5 years ago, it's 8 years ago, and we've learned nothing, and the country hasn't changed, and it worked then, we think it did, and so why should we change?
I don't know.
Well, we got this pandemic going on and people actually want the government to start doing things. Well, no, we can't have that. We have to teach people the government can't do anything, and the best way to do that is prevent it from doing anything. Well, you're in the minority now. You don't necessarily have that power. Well, but cover it as if we're the majority.
Well, we could do that.
Because we're the ones that give you interviews. We're the ones that leak.
Yeah. Well, that does work.
Yeah, to a certain extent. So, right. When I'm watching this play out in D.C., that's the framework that I'm looking at this, the lens that I'm looking at this through. And it helps explain a lot of the coverage. Now, what else is really going on? Some fascinating stories, I think. Again, back to the pandemic, but politics. The rising politicization of COVID vaccines. As shots roll out to growing numbers of Americans, the political picture is getting more chaotic. Some states and businesses are starting to treat proof of vaccination as a kind of passport. Biden said they're not going to have a passport. Cruise ships say you have to have proof of vaccination. And some states like New York are really into it. Cuomo is announcing something called a Excelsior Pass, a way for state residents to easily show proof of vaccination using a smartphone. Proof of a shot is now required for entry into some large venues under New York's current reopening guidelines. Texas is different. Texas and Florida say you don't have to do anything. All you need to do is bring a little bottle of toxic sludge, and that'll get you in.
Lick the handrail on your way in.
Right. Fauci made clear yesterday he and the Biden administration are likely to stay out of it. I doubt that the federal government will be the main mover of a vaccine passport concept, he told the Political Dispatch podcast. They may be involved in making sure things are done fairly and equitably, but I doubt the federal government is going to be the leading element in that. So there's that going on. And so you find Republicans arguing about such things as Biden wants to do vaccine passport. Well, he just announced that's not what he wants to do. Yes, but besides, it's not infrastructure because we define infrastructure. Well, but, infrastructure is what's in the bill, and that looks like it's going to pass. Yes, but, so it's all jockeying to see who can have the upper hand in messaging. And in fact, the underlying issue here is how do you actually get people vaccinated? And why is that a problem? Because variants are rising. Something like 5 states are responsible for the majority of rising cases: Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, New York, New Jersey, and they're the ones with variants. And so different governors, different policies, same problem. And the variants are a big deal. And so we're trying to get vaccines into people's arms to combat that. And who, of course, are the biggest groups that don't want to get vaccinated? It's white evangelicals. It's Republicans.
Oh, all right.
In fact, New York Times, white evangelical resistance is obstacle in vaccination effort. Millions of white evangelical adults in the U.S. do not intend to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Tenets of faith and mistrust of science play a role, and so do politics. So that's what we're wrestling with here. And again, when you hear they're going to make us do a vaccination passport, what they're really saying is, I don't want to get vaccinated, and you guys are trying to make a case that it's a good idea, and then you're going to ask for proof. Mm-hmm. And you're making me the victim.
The bad guy.
Because I don't want to get vaccinated, and you're making me the bad guy.
Yeah.
Well, that's because, you are the bad guy. Right. Somebody said on Twitter that, Republicans don't like taking personal responsibility anymore.
Well, true.
And it's not fair, or it's up to them to decide whether or not to get the vaccine. And the problem there is that you not getting the vaccine puts my kids and my grandmother at risk.
Yeah.
So you getting the vaccine may or may not kill you, but you're killing my grandmother. I mean, it's a communitarian kind of thing.
Well,
and they're wrestling with trying to find a way out of trying to say that that has nothing to do with it when, in fact, it has everything to do with it.
yeah. It's a strange stance to try to take. It's contrary to everything everybody understands and believes about disease of any kind, really, and will adopt their policies. I will stand my ground against you now.
Right. Now, here's some of the language
grandmother.
that people are using in the evangelical community, according to this New York Times article.
Bless their hearts.
Stephanie Nana, an evangelical Christian in Edmond, Oklahoma, refused to get a vaccine because she believed it contained aborted cell tissue.
Okay.
It doesn't. And Catholic bishops have said, in fact,
idea.
it's fine. Nathan French, as far as I know, no relation to either David French's we were talking about, who leads a non-denominational ministry in Tacoma, Washington, said he received a divine message that God was the ultimate healer and deliverer and the vaccine is not the savior.
Okay, but God permitted it to be made and gave somebody the knowledge how to make it.
God permitted you to drive a car and get a license, so why shouldn't he permit you to get a vaccine? Maury Armstrong, a Bible-believing nutritionist outside of Dallas, said she didn't need the vaccine because God designed the body to heal itself if given the right nutrients. More than that, it would be God's will if I'm here or if I'm not here. Yes. And again, God's will whether you are here or whether you're not here, but leave my grandmother out of it.
Yeah, that's true too. And, you could think of mRNA as a nutrient if you want.
The deeply held spiritual convictions or counterfactual arguments may vary, but across white evangelical America, reasons not to get vaccinated are spread as quickly as the virus. The opposition is rooted in a mix of religious faith and a long-standing wariness of mainstream science, and fueled by broader cultural distrust of institutions and gravitation to online conspiracy theories. And there's about 41 million white evangelical adults in the U.S., and 45% of them said in late February they're not getting vaccinated.
Right. Well, watch this. Pretty soon there'll be about 30 million.
So it's a problem.
Yeah.
And, trying to reach that group in particular is going to take some thinking.
Yeah, I think they're missing a big opportunity, given the built-in disadvantages for minorities and people of color in accessing the vaccine. They should be absolutely 100% pro-vaccine and pro-vaccine passport. They could probably use that to suppress the vote.
So it's become a thing that if you want a vaccine, go to these areas.
Yeah.
Look up where there are white evangelicals in large numbers. Go to Colorado Springs, get your vaccine there.
Which is only going to scare them when people of color show up, and then they'll have another insurrection, and what's his name will write another article about it. Look, all these people are changing the complexion of my community. We're not staying, we're just here for the vaccine.
These variants are spreading, and we're nowhere near done with this. And so I got my vaccine yesterday.
Yes,
that's great.
Good.
I have some minor symptoms. That's okay. It means the vaccine is working. The newly opened clinic in the town next to me was really smooth. And in fact, word of mouth, they offer at 5 p.m., stand online, first come, first served, and if we have any extra, you can have it, even without an appointment. And there was a line of about 20 people. I went about 5:45. That was my appointment. And there was no waiting, no line.
Good.
Go right in, get your shot, get out. It took me about 15 minutes to get through the whole thing. And there was a line of 8 to 10 people. And the clinic had just opened yesterday. And so this is all word of mouth.
Oh.
And people found out about it, and hopefully they got their vaccines. So, there's a good segment of the population which is going to get vaccinated, and then there's going to be this section that isn't. And this is with the background of rising cases. So keep wearing your masks. It doesn't mean you're going to have to do it forever, but you got to hold off a little bit because things are not good in terms of where the numbers are going.
Oh. Well, okay, expected. And,
now, here's a thing to keep an eye on. This is from the Washington Post. Are youth sports an engine of the B117 outbreaks?
Utes.
That's the British variant, I think. There's one of more than 189 people confirmed or suspected to be linked to an unusual youth sports outbreak of the coronavirus in Carver County, Minnesota, driven by the B117 variant, which was first seen in the United Kingdom. The interleague cases span all levels of K through 12. Until now, we haven't seen transmission like this in kids in the pandemic, said Mike Osterholm, fondly known as Dr. Doom by those who follow him. An infectious disease specialist at the University of Minnesota who served as an advisor to President Biden. After a surge of infections among children peaked in January, a new wave has been building since mid-March, and many worry about the risk of vulnerable, still unvaccinated adults. So we know that younger people, including 50 and under, are getting hit hard. Some of these are winding up in hospital. A lot of the cases of the multi-system inflammatory illness are turning out to be in people who are like in their 20s.
Oh.
Not just kids, under 12.
Yes.
And so, again, these are all things to watch. And the resistance to getting vaccinated is, as Joe Biden would finally say, a big effing deal.
Yeah. You shouldn't do it. And yeah, I imagine as we vaccinate more and more of our older population, we're going to find that, well, the virus is still there. The virus still wants to thrive and reproduce.
Yes, but they don't wind up dying and in the hospital at the same rates. Yes, but they wind up dying and in the hospital. That's the point. And even at these lower rates, that's a lot of people who are dying and in the hospital.
That's
so
what
you need to do something about it.
When you visit them, you can say, it's terrible that you're in the hospital and dying, but there's so many fewer of you now and at a different rate. It's fantastic. So there's really nothing to worry about, except the dying. So
one of the reasons, legitimate good reasons why people want schools to reopen is so that kids can do sports again. But what if it turns out that doing sports is how it spreads?
Then you would not want to do that.
So again, that all goes in the mix.
If you're into science, yes.
It's important to keep an eye on that and keep track of what's going on and not lose sight of, at least as far as the evolving science goes, what's good to do and what's not good to do. Yeah. It isn't just, okay, I'm done with it, I'm sick of it, let's just go back to the way we were.
That can't work. All right. Well,
all right, so that's the story. More of the Derek Chauvin trial today. Again, it's not a George Floyd trial. It's just that the defense is trying to put all black people on trial because they're superhumanly strong and really scary. And so when 2 or 3 of them gather together in a giant mob where they're outnumbered by the police, that's scary enough so that you won't pay attention to your real job.
Guess so.
According to the defense.
There's a lot of fear out there. And I guess no surprise that a number of off-duty police officers showed up as insurrectionists on January 6th, too.
Well, it's good they have time.
Yeah.
Well, all right, that's a story. We'll try to gather some other stuff together and try to make some sort of coherent whole. I guess the theme today is fear and loathing in the Republican Party, actual governance and getting stuff done on the Democratic side to the point where you now kind of expect them to succeed.
Yes, sure.
Which is a little weird. So let's raise the bar. Let's make it really hard for Biden to pass that bar. Well, okay, fine. The bar was so low during the Trump administration. It's appropriate that you raise it. Just don't raise it too high and don't get ridiculous about what you're seeing.
All right. Well, again, I'm not terribly worried. It's there's work ahead of us, but yeah, I mean, it seems like today's early round of stories was about, there's this monumental task ahead of us. It's pretty routine. Quite honestly, infrastructure bills. They used to be things that were bipartisan because everybody wants to have projects, and this time they're going to refuse, but now they have a way around it. Okay.
Yep. So that's a story, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.
All right. Goodbye.
Which is tomorrow.
Yes, that's true.
Unless things change.
Right. And I know it's garbage day, so you're probably preparing for... if you'd like to get a word in, Abby, no problem.
Yep.
Everyone
she's
enjoys
been well behaved this morning, which is a good thing.
And, you're a good girl. How about a treat?
Yeah, how about it?
All right.
She agrees. Take care, and I'll go tend to that right now.
Okay, good. And I don't want to not have that happen. She probably just heard me say that, and now you're obligated to give her a treat. And everyone's on your side if you do. So, well done. Thanks again, Greg. Let's see. Where do we want to pick up on this thread? Or do we just change directions? I'm really not... I'm not sure why the weird ring of pessimism, maybe that's just, residual. I've been active in Democratic politics for a long time, and so I'm just naturally a pessimist, but the idea that this would be so difficult to get Democratic senators, including Joe Manchin, on board I guess what we're really seeing here is we're just used to Joe Manchin being a pain in the ass about things. But to the extent that he's declared clearly what he wants out of life in the Senate, I guess if you can believe him, it really does seem to be all about infrastructure investment. Of course, the more of it that is happening in and around West Virginia and to the benefit of West Virginia, the better as far as he's concerned. But I don't see... I mean, he may have learned how much leverage he has and then decide to hold out that, whatever, $10 billion being spent in West Virginia isn't enough if I can get $20 billion. But he's been, the one thing he's been begging for is a big investment in infrastructure, and here's a chance to do it. So I don't know if it's really going to be difficult to get him on board with his vote. Kristen Sinema, I guess, could be a problem, if only because no one knows what she wants to do, but I imagine she'd be in favor of infrastructure projects in Arizona as well. So I'm not really sure why the worry about getting them on board. And we can go back. I guess we didn't really read all the way through the articles yesterday. We kind of glossed over it and spoke about the filibuster, or rather the reconciliation ruling at a 50,000-foot level with Joan, because, well, that's what we do with Joan. It's an easy thing to do, to soar to 50,000 feet and look at the big picture. But maybe we should have spent some time getting down into what should have happened is I should have spent time before her segment laying that groundwork. But I had to tell you about what was going on in Chocolate World and in prior shows, Matt Gaetz World, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe now we can double back. I have one Politico piece on it, which is, just sort of good general information from a Politico perspective, which is good information, bad perspective, usually. But we also have the Hill piece that Joan mentioned yesterday, which had I wanted to check in on because they had an additional twist in their headline that made me say, what is that all about? We'll start with the Politico piece. I don't think either one of them are terribly overlong. But the basics here. Dems can use unprecedented move for an extra filibuster-proof bill, Schumer aide says. This was one of the earlier pieces and doesn't, I don't think it relies so much on reaction comments from others, which is a good thing in that we can focus on the procedure and not be worried about the games being played elsewhere, like Republicans objecting that this is somehow out of bounds. But at the very least, this whole episode is a big win for listeners to the Kagro in the Morning Show and viewers, readers of my Twitter stream, and people who go way back to Congress Matters and whatnot. I think for about 10 years plus now, we've been using every opportunity to shoehorn in a mention somewhere that no reconciliation, there's no rule anywhere or not even any implications of the rules anywhere that indicate that reconciliation is a procedure you can only use once a year or even once in a budget year necessarily, but that the use of reconciliation is tied to the adoption of reconciliation instructions in a budget resolution, and that the usual practice, because both budget bills and reconciliation bills are kind of a pain in the ass to pass in terms of floor time being used, they like to consolidate them. If you have 5 different instructions on reconciliation, they will combine them into one omnibus reconciliation bill just to get the whole job taken care of all at once, but they don't have to do it that way. So yes, you can absolutely have, for various reasons, more than, and in some cases many more than, just one reconciliation bill in any given year, whether you measure that as a budget year or a calendar year. But anyway, pet, I don't even know if it rises to the level of peeve at this point, but we don't have to do it all that often. But anyway, you've heard it, and now you see it happening. So, all right. The interpretation of this new ruling could give Democrats significantly more opportunities to push their priorities past GOP opposition. That would be GOP filibusters, of course. Caitlin Emma writing this piece for Politico, and I now see we're going to be bumping up against our top of the hour break, which is great because it gives me a chance to drink some water and and cough a lot, which I don't want to do while I'm on the air. But anyway, here we go. Let's see what we can get in as a teaser before the break. Democrats can pass another major piece of legislation such as, let's say, for instance, President Joe Biden's $2 trillion plus infrastructure plan by revisiting the budget process they used to approve his coronavirus relief package without Republican support. A spokesperson for the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said on Monday. Now, we were going to pass that without Republican support no matter what process got used, but the only one that can actually pass it, because they were dedicated to not providing support, would be reconciliation. Now, they had the opportunity to support it. They're welcome to support it if they want to. It doesn't mean that they're not allowed to, just because we're using reconciliation. Anyway, the interpretation of the ruling from the Senate parliamentarian, the upper chamber's official advisor on procedural matters, could give Democrats significantly more opportunities to push their legislative priorities past a filibuster. That's the basics of it. Oh, too loud on that alarm. How come that's the case? Sometimes I feel like no matter how much time I spend turning down the ringer, it never really takes. Anyway, the procedural leeway of using the budget process to make that happen, already, here comes the negativity, may not be a panacea for the majority party. All 50 Democratic senators will have to go along with the approach. Wow. Which includes moderates like, of course, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, and they have advised, it says, against using reconciliation a second time. So that's at least some foundation for believing that they might be difficult to get on board, but I don't know if that's really the case. And I mean, if you get a ruling from the parliamentarian that says it's absolutely available to you, I don't know what their objection is going to be. I know they love to save the filibuster or leave it in an untouched. Well, it's untouched. So what's your problem? But it doesn't have to be rational. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's jump right back into the Politico piece here. But again, at least we have some understanding of why there would be initial skepticism about Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema going along with this. Apparently, according to this, they have both advised in some capacity against using reconciliation a second time. But I don't know. I wonder whether the ruling will change their mind or whether they thought that the ruling would come down against Democrats and that they were thinking of overruling the parliamentarian in order to use it a second time. And now that's not the case. Senate Budget Chair Bernie Sanders said on MSNBC on Monday night that the parliamentarian's new analysis is important because it gives us a little more flexibility and alleviates the need for Democrats to jam all of their policy goals into the next major bill that they take up. In other words, right now, what this new reconciliation package is about is dealing with long-term structural problems, Sanders said. Everybody knows our physical infrastructure is collapsing. We know we can create millions of jobs transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel, but we have got to deal with human infrastructure. This is actually, I mean, it's fine as filler, but it doesn't really say anything. Okay, let's see if the rest of the article is any better. A Democratic aide familiar with the ruling said the parliamentarian's feedback is a good first step. However, we still have to work out the details. Like what's going to be in the bill and what's going to be in the revised budget resolution that carries the reconciliation instructions. Although, I mean, I guess that doesn't have to be a hard question. Like you might say, I don't know, the budget's fine. So you literally can, if you want to, change the budget by $1, whatever, someplace, and then throw some reconciliation instructions in there. I don't know if they're going to want to do things that way. Probably not, and they probably have some larger goals in mind, but it doesn't take much. But, of course, you still have to get through the 50 hours and the vote-a-rama and all of that. So it is a pain in the neck. The decision, as read by Schumer's office, represents a major expansion of the reconciliation process. Well, I mean, it was always there. It's just, what it is a major expansion of the willingness of the majority to sit through 50-hour debates and vote-a-ramas. And, I mean, it's not that they're really willing to do it. It's just that they know that any other route to doing anything else for the foreseeable future ends in filibuster and stays there. So, fine. So let's see. A major expansion of the reconciliation process that allows the passage of some bills with a simple Senate majority. Of course, that's because of the time limit. I really wish they would say that in these articles. That stretch of reconciliation empowers any party in full control of Washington to theoretically use the tool as often as they want if Schumer decides to follow through on using the budget process to pass legislation like Biden's infrastructure plan or an immigration overhaul, which he has not yet done. Immigration would be a lot tougher because making it budgetary in nature such that it still passes the Byrd rule is still a problem. I mean, that's hanging out there throughout. If it's not mentioned outright, remember that the same feature that makes reconciliation attractive, that is the time-limited debate which results in the immunity from the filibuster, and therefore the ability to pass it with a simple majority, comes with the Byrd rule, which means, and there's no indication that the parliamentarian is bending at all on that. There's still every possibility that if, for instance, you tried to take care of immigration or take a second stab at raising the minimum wage, for that matter, that the parliamentarian would say, well, you're allowed to pass another reconciliation bill if you want to. It's just that this stuff, just like last reconciliation bill, it couldn't be in there, according to me anyway. It also can't be in this one. There's no new kind of more flexible rule for the next reconciliation bill. And again, I think it's imprecise to say, well, this is a big stretch and it's a major expansion, and it now means that in theory you can use the reconciliation process as much as you want. It always meant that you could use it as much as you want. It's just that the answer to how much do you wanna was always once, because it's a giant pain in the ass. So, could you have done it twice? Yes. Did anybody ever do it twice? Sure, they did. Does that mean that you can do it 5 times? If you set up enough instructions in your budget resolution and opt at the budget committee stage to enact them in separate reconciliation bills, then yeah, you can. It's just, why would you? Anyway, the parliamentarian's opinion is an important step forward in this, that this key pathway is available to Democrats if needed. Schumer's spokesperson said in a statement on Monday, if he does proceed down that path, Schumer's never before tried maneuver, this version of it, yes, is sure to draw complaints from Republicans who could weaponize the budget process themselves if they regain majorities in both chambers and the White House. Yes, of course. It would be ridiculous to think that they wouldn't have that ability unless, of course, we were cheaters like Republicans who change the rules sometimes. It doesn't always work, but sometimes pull the ladder up after them and say, this can't work for you for whatever reason. And sometimes they have accomplices in the Democratic ranks who allow them to do this. But yeah, they could absolutely do this and pass 2 and 3 budget resolutions in a year and add more reconciliation instructions and pass things that aren't subject to the filibuster. They would, of course, be subject to the same limitations of the Byrd rule unless they also opted to try and overrule the parliamentarian on the Byrd rule, which, again, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. We start the ball rolling on some of these things like filibuster reform. Then they smash down an inconvenient wall along the way, like the Supreme Court nominations exception that was left in place in 2013. And then all Democrats begin to realize there's really no reason why we couldn't smash down the whole thing all at once. And Republicans have helped us do it. It's not the worst thing in the world. Schumer had asked the parliamentarian for permission to revisit the fiscal 2021 budget resolution that Democrats already deployed to pass Biden's $1.9 trillion pandemic aid package, hoping to unlock a second attempt at reconciliation. And it worked. If Democrats choose to reuse that budget measure, they'll have at least 3 and possibly more opportunities to use reconciliation to pass a host of their priorities before the midterm elections, which of course aren't until next year. What they're talking about here is they have this weird habit in the press covering reconciliation of saying Democrats will have 2 chances to do it before the midterm elections. Under the old theory that it could only happen once a year, which was never a good theory, but that at least it usually happened only once a year. For some reason, instead of saying, expressing it in terms of being once a year, they said, well, you'll be able to do it twice in a 2-year period before the next elections. Okay, that's another way of saying it. Now, what if you could do it twice a year? Well, then you would be able to do it 4 times prior to the next election. But since you've already done it once, that leads them to say dumb things like they could do it at least 3 or possibly more times before the next election. Well, that's what 2 + 2 - 1 is. So thanks for handling the hard math, Politico. But the more important point about the ruling in terms of what it means, institutionally, is the bit here that says, and possibly more. It could be, the problem is it's an algebra problem. It will be X minus 1. How many times could Democrats use reconciliation between now and the next election? The answer is some number X minus the one that they've already done. So the total number of uses of reconciliation between now and some future point will be some number. And the total will be, some number. And the number that can be done between now and that point is that number minus the one we already just did. Okay. Duh. So could they do it 50,000 times? If they're willing to sit through 50,000 budget resolutions, I guess so. Unless the possibility arises that the parliamentarian says, the last budget, you only changed $10 worth of stuff, and I'm not approving this stuff unless there's a major, I'm not going to rule a budget resolution to be, in fact, a valid budget resolution unless it changes some major portion of the budget. I don't know whether that's a rule that they can impose or not, but I guess it's a possibility if they just get tired of doing this. Anyway, all right, we'll continue on here. Perhaps the biggest reason why Democrats may not want to use the procedure over and over again is what I told you, the sheer pain inflicted by a process that forces members to spend hours upon hours on the floor in both chambers, in addition to 2 Senate voting marathons in which anyone can force a roll call vote on any amendment of their choice. That is going to be interesting, and I guess it's a good reminder. Yeah, there's a lot of pain involved in forcing members to spend hours upon hours on the floor in both chambers, I guess, but in the Senate, to be sure. And so for those of you who are wondering, well, why would Republicans somehow feel constrained by something like a talking filibuster rule? If it's written right, it then forces them to spend hours upon hours on the floor, which is sheer pain, as they say here in the earlier part of this paragraph, and they won't want to do it. Of course, it will involve Democrats as well, and they also won't want to do it. But there you have it. And again, though there will be Republican complaints, the thing to keep in mind is, what's the big complaint? You have more voting going on and more opportunity to offer amendments than the minority has had in the Senate in decades. And your big complaint is, oh no, it's what? Exactly. Oh no, it ends in a Democratic victory, is what your complaint is. While Democratic leaders haven't officially decided to exclude Republicans in pursuit of Biden's infrastructure ambitions, why would they? Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has vowed that none of his 50-member GOP conference would support Biden's new spending bill. So there's the answer. Without Republican votes, Democrats must rely on lockstep support within the caucus, which is far from guaranteed. But it's a lot easier to get 50 Democrats to agree on what should be in a bill than to get 50 Democrats plus a handful of Republicans to agree, because Republicans have declared, I don't care what you put in it. Don't tell me the substance. I'm against it from the beginning. Well, okay, then I can't negotiate with you. But that will mean you need lockstep cooperation from Democrats. Well, luckily, we're all in the same political party, and things are pretty polarized. So, we lunch together every Tuesday. Maybe we can hammer something out. We have, after all, gotten all 50 of you, some of whom are not actually members of the Democratic Party, to sign your name on the dotted line when it comes to saying that you're going to caucus with Democrats. So that seems like a pretty good indication that maybe we can work something out. All right. I don't know. I just don't see the worry about that. So what else have we got? Things are far from guaranteed, and here's an example. For example, Biden has promised to fully pay for that package over the next 15 years with a panoply of tax increases, assuming the hikes aren't rolled back in years to come. That includes boosting the corporate tax rate to 28%, up from 21%, but at least one moderate Democrat, Senator Manchin, has already signaled that he wants a lower corporate rate. Okay, so, I mean, I guess if you said, well, how much lower? Well, it should be 25%. All right. I mean, we might be able to do that. Then you'll have Biden saying, well, then it's not fully paid for. But you could either find another pay for, or you could have Arliss Bunny go and talk to the president and say, what are you worried about a pay for? Don't worry about it. It's absolutely unnecessary. And in fact, if you really wanted to, you could absolutely do a 25% corporate tax rate to get Manchin's vote. And when it's not paid for, Republicans will say, but this isn't paid for. And you'll say, okay, 50 votes. And now Kamala Harris, okay, 51. And it's done. Now, I feel bad about it, but I feel good about investing almost $3 trillion in the infrastructure of the country. So if that's enough for you to get over it, then problem solved. I don't know. I mean, it's always going to be work to get all 50 people lined up, but I don't think it's going to be that much. It's not an impossibility. It's not like asking them to vote to change the filibuster via nuclear option, which they've really dug in on. And, you know, they're a little bit irrational about it. But even that, I think they could change their mind on with the right situation. All right. So there was another piece here. This one was from The Hill. This is the one that Joan referenced yesterday, and we put it in the roundup that Scott wrote up for you yesterday. But if you didn't get a chance to read it, I'm wondering, and now I think I see what they were talking about when they wrote their headline, Senate parliamentarian to let Democrats bypass GOP filibuster on 2 bills. Again, I'm going to find out. Are they trying to just assign a number again? You can only use reconciliation once in a year. No, that's actually not true. Well, then surely the answer must be, if not once a year, then it has to be twice, right? Because reconciliation is super rare, and it can't be anything else but 2. Well, it could be 3, it could be 5, it'll probably be 2, but let's see what they're talking about. Alexander Bolton wrote this one. We'll see how well he does with it. Senate parliamentarian ruled on Monday. Okay, we know what they ruled. It's a win for Schumer. We know about that. It allows him to pass, we know what, the infrastructure package. Let's see. By revising the 2021 budget resolution, Schumer could pass a budget resolution for fiscal year 2022 to do a third reconciliation package for the second half of the Biden infrastructure agenda, or the fiscal 21 budget could be revised a third time to set up a third reconciliation package. That's true, too. Why are we limiting things to 2, then? Top Schumer aides had argued to parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough last month that Section 304 of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 allows them to revise the budget resolution for fiscal 2021 to create additional reconciliation instructions, setting up pathways to pass 2 more bills this year with only a simple majority in the 50-50 Senate. Again, it could be 50 if they wanted to, but all right. The parliamentarian is advised that a revised budget resolution may contain budget reconciliation instructions. That's the key of the ruling, by the way. This confirms the leader's interpretation of the Budget Act and allows Democrats additional tools to improve. So it means you can use reconciliation again, right? No decisions have been made on whether or not they're going to do that, but the parliamentarian's opinion is an important step forward in allowing it. That's good news. Dems have used budget reconciliation process earlier this year, as you know, to pass the coronavirus relief bill. The new ruling will enable Schumer and Pelosi to break up Biden's infrastructure proposal into 2 legislative packages. Okay, that's a possibility also. I mean, again, they could divide it into 50 if they wanted to, but I see no reason to do that many. The first portion, a $2.25 trillion measure unveiled by the White House last month, includes more traditional infrastructure priorities. The second part, planned for later in the year, will include more people-focused spending priorities favored by progressives, such as expanded child care, free community college, universal pre-kindergarten, and more affordable housing. I will note for the record, just historically, like, don't go crazy or anything, but historically, when the deal is, well, why don't we do it in two parts? And we'll do the moderate things first, and then the progressives, the things that you want, well, we'll try that in the second one. It tends not to come together for various reasons, not the least of which is running out of time at the end or whatever, or having everybody sit through another budget resolution and saying, now I remember why we don't do multiple reconciliation bills. And then it gets that much harder to convince people, yeah, let's do a third one so we can deliver on the promise to progressives to have their chance at it later. All we'll do is, well, we can do an infinite number of them if we want to. So why don't we take care of this one we all agree on first, and then you can help build support for a third one, and we'll go back to the third one. But if the second one is a procedural nightmare, then guess what's on the chopping block? Progressives' turn at doing it. So they weren't going to agree to let you go first, so that was never going to happen. But this you should be aware of. Anyway, both the House and Senate will need to pass another concurrent resolution to trigger an additional set of reconciliation instructions. That is to say, a budget. That's the form it takes, concurrent resolution. Democratic aides say a second infrastructure package will be needed if Biden's $2.25 trillion proposal is scaled down in an effort to secure any Republican votes or lock down the support of Democratic centrists such as Senator Manchin. A Schumer aide said last week that the majority leader wants to maximize his options to allow Senate Democrats multiple pathways to advance the Build Back Better agenda if Republicans try to obstruct or water down a bipartisan agreement. Senate Finance Committee Chair Ron Wyden, who has jurisdiction of the tax legislation Democrats plan to pass to pay for part of Biden's infrastructure agenda, applauded the decision of the parliamentarian. And then here he does it. There's some words involved as well as some action. I don't know whether he really applauds, but he's pleased by it. The American people want bold action. You can do it now. That's good. All right. That's the gist of his comments. I shouldn't give short shrift to Wyden and read the comments of everybody else in full, but I'm getting tired of things that are filler on this story. Senate Republicans argued that Democrats should not have been allowed to move two separate reconciliation packages with special protections from a filibuster from the same budget resolution, which is fine because it's not going to. It's going to be a different one. And even so, quite honestly, you can absolutely do that. If you have budget reconciliation instructions on one of the three categories in which you are allowed to provide such instructions, and I always do this, and I always forget offhand. All right, well, what are the various? Well, of course, you can do things that are deficit reduction. You can do things that are tax increases. You can do things that are related, remember, to the debt ceiling as well. So if you did something that was much more traditionally recognized as reconciliation content, and you also wanted to raise the debt ceiling, if you wanted to do them in two bills, you could do it, and there would really be nothing. There's no logic whatsoever to the objection that you're not allowed to do. We're just back to the same early objection. There's nothing that says that you can only do this once a year. It's a stupid objection to begin with, and now that Republicans are making it, it's even dumber. But they say it anyway. This is an abuse of the process, and clearly not what reconciliation was designed to do, but they're going to go forward anyway. No, it is what it was designed to do. It's just that's not the way people have usually done it. And so what? But it wasn't long ago that when Democrats were trying to use reconciliation and just do it once, they were busy insisting that reconciliation was an extraordinary measure and it was hardly ever used, and it was just as bad as, demon pass, as they were calling the procedure that they used in the House, where they would deem something to have been passed by adopting a measure that says so in a rule that they were voting on. But they tried to make out, and during the march to the finalization of the Affordable Care Act, you'll recall, I think, if you were around at the time, that they used reconciliation to pass a few legislative patches to make everything work once they lost their 60th vote in the Senate, the Democrats, that they would have needed otherwise to break the filibuster and pass the amended version of the Affordable Care Act with the changes that the Senate wanted in it. So instead, they made those changes through a reconciliation bill to the extent they were able to do it. And because there was nothing in the way of the glide path, procedurally speaking, Republicans just said, well, reconciliation itself is an evil thing and something they just made up, and nobody has ever used it, and especially never for health care, which was not true ever in any part. Not only had reconciliation been used fairly frequently at that point, but the Republicans had been the last ones to use it at that point. And as for the claim that it had never been used for health care, that is belied by the existence of the COBRA program, and no one really loves the COBRA program unless it's an absolute emergency, but the emergency extension of your health insurance. If you were to lose your job, you could hold on to your benefits. COBRA didn't stand for anything that had to do with health care. I don't remember what the C was now that I think. It must have been comprehensive or something like that. But anyway, the OBRA part of COBRA was the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. So you tell me, if COBRA, which is a healthcare program, passed under a consolidated or whatever Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, can healthcare be dealt with in a reconciliation bill? It can. It's right in the name. Anyway, so big deal. They lie about this stuff all the time, and they lied about it then, and they'll be doing it again now. The party in control of the White House, House, and Senate often seeks to advance only one reconciliation package per fiscal year budget. During former President Trump's first year in office, Republicans used a budget resolution in fiscal 2017 to advance legislation that would have repealed parts of the Affordable Care Act, followed by a budget resolution for 2018 to enact the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Schumer used the first budget reconciliation package for the American Rescue Plan. McDonough, the parliamentarian, dealt Democrats a setback on that bill by ruling the federal minimum wage thing as out of order under the Byrd Rule. Revising the 2021 budget resolution will require 15 hours of Senate floor debate and another budget vote-a-rama, which will burn up valuable time on the calendar. Well, that's interesting. So it's not 50 hours because it's not a brand new budget resolution from scratch, but because it's a revised budget, you get 15 hours, which, by the way, that by itself will tell you how out of bounds this is. Why is it a 15-hour time limit? Because the Budget Act prescribes that time limit, which means that the Budget Act has contemplated revised budget resolutions and has said, in fact, you can't or won't need to anyway waste 50 hours on the debate. You'll only get 15. It's clearly was written with the idea that, from time to time, you'll be passing additional budget resolutions, and there's nothing that says you can't put some more instructions in that. So 15 hours is a lot better than 50 as it happens. 15 hours for revision on the Senate floor. You still have to report. You still have to call it up. You still have to get to the floor. You still have a possibility of a vote-a-rama. All of this true, says Bill Hoagland, budget expert at the Bipartisan Policy Center. I'm not quite sure, in the big scheme of things, you save much in the way of time. It's not with the vote-a-rama anyway. After revising the 2021 budget resolution, Democrats could then pass a resolution for fiscal year 2022. Well, it's a new fiscal year. Of course you're going to want to do something like that. That would, of course, set up what could be the third budget resolution to pass in the second half of Biden's infrastructure agenda and raise the federal debt limit by the year's end. But hey, if they sneak in another one, it could be the fourth budget resolution, or the fifth, or the sixth. I think they need to stop trying to assign numbers to it. Anyway, time for us to wrap up this segment and perhaps move on to something else. There's a little bit more we could discuss. I'll check it out over this next 2-minute break and see if it's worth it. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, yeah, I said there was another little tiny bit to this Hill piece, and we might as well read it, just so you know what it's all about. Congress has suspended the debt limit through July 2021, just in case you were wondering what's happening with that, at which point the Treasury Department will begin to use the extraordinary measures they sometimes implement to extend the federal government's borrowing authority for a few months, likely until the end of the year. That's of note because, remember, extending the debt limit is something you can use reconciliation to change, though they don't always do that. And very often they did not because they wanted to force bipartisan responsibility in the past for raising the debt limit. And the dire consequences of failing to raise the debt limit used to motivate even the so-called budget hawks among the Republicans to sign on and say, you know, the downside is just a lot worse. It's as bad as it looks to raise the debt ceiling if you're a debt and deficit hawk. The economic consequences are worse. But now Republicans are sort of stuck in burn it all down mode. They can't be counted on for these things anymore. So you might have to do it under reconciliation. Anyway, lastly, while Democrats could include multiple reconciliation instructions in the 2022 budget resolution to pass both halves of Biden's infrastructure agenda and raise the debt limit, leaders may have other priorities in mind for that resolution. So there's always, of course, something else, some other pressing need. And if you're really looking to or feeling like you're going to be forced to do all major legislation via reconciliation, then you're going to want to parcel it out in some fashion, I guess, such that each reconciliation bill, I guess, doesn't rise to the level where you start to lose Manchin and Sinema votes again, or maybe somebody else along the way too. Who knows? Anyway, but yeah, I mean, I guess the upshot of all this is there can be more reconciliation bills, and despite having it laid out, I think, pretty clearly by the parliamentarian's office, the press, the media, still reeling from the possibility of there being more than one, so they figured that 2 must be the cap, or certainly 3 would be at the most all you could possibly do. And they say so, but they just don't look like they get their heads around the idea that you can do a lot of them. Although, I don't know. I mean, I guess I haven't studied Section 304 of the Budget Act, and I guess now that I've found out that I'm taken by surprise by the fact that there's actually a provision in the Act for a 15-hour time limit on a budget resolution revision, maybe I will be surprised to find somewhere in there at some point that there's some limitation on the number of revisions, though you would think that that would have gotten some mention at some point. But that would have required the journalists who spend even less time than I do reading these provisions to have gone out of their way to read Section 304. Maybe we'll do it. There's a document at the ready in pocket. We could do it. But if we did that, then we wouldn't have time to touch on some of these other fun subjects. Like this one, you probably have heard this story and you've been marveling at the fact that we haven't touched on it today. Yesterday's Republican talking point. And the reason we haven't touched on it very much so far is because now it's today. And yesterday it was the talking point, and it was basically destroyed. It will take some time for Republicans to give it up, and, depending on how crazy they really are, more time to give it up. But yesterday the Republican talking point of the day was that it was a terrible thing that Major League Baseball had moved the All-Star game from Atlanta, or rather I should say the outer suburbs of Atlanta, to Denver. And that enters into it, the fact that it's a suburban stadium outside of metropolitan Atlanta, or Atlanta proper, in that somebody even tried to play a little bit of Republican version of wokeness about racism, I guess you could say, by saying, well, and I think it was Tim Scott tried to carry this ball for the Republicans, saying, well, among other things, one of the things you were doing was moving the All-Star game out of Atlanta, which is, I forget, I think he put a figure to it, and I think he might even have said 51% black, which, I'll take his word for it. It's entirely possible. Let me see if I can find his, what is he tweet as Senator Tim Scott? I think so. Is that right? No. Well, I don't know. I'll find his Twitter feed and then look for the tweet. Yeah, all right. It is. I'm sorry. It is Senator Tim Scott, but he spells out Senator. I was doing Sen. Senator Tim Scott. And I think, let's see. I think if I search that in Atlanta and look for the latest, I'll be able to find the tweet we're looking for. Here it is from yesterday. The first part of it is what's debunked by the article I just selected to read. The second part is the part that I'm pointing out. Yeah, here's this. Atlanta is 51% black and Denver is 9.2% black. So the Major League Baseball is moving the All-Star game out of Atlanta, which has more, in this case, the second point, more, as he's saying, more black people, more black population than Denver does. And if you're doing it to support the local minority voters who might be disenfranchised by the Georgia law, according to your liberal, democratic, socialist, communist, Chinese party claim, then the real thing, if you really want to help the minority population stay in Atlanta and have the economic benefits of the All-Star game being there trickle down to the 51% black population in Atlanta. However, it's worth pointing out, as he says, Major League Baseball is moving the All-Star game out of Atlanta. No, the Atlanta Braves were moving the All-Star game out of Atlanta by moving their stadium out of Atlanta because basically their largely white fan base that pays for the very expensive tickets was afraid of going into spooky, scary Atlanta where 51% of the population is black. Oh my God. So they moved it out to a more convenient location where they could park their cars and not be bothered by people of color being nearby while they watched their baseball game. So the Atlanta Braves organization took care of moving the All-Star game out of Atlanta, but he means out of the greater Atlanta area and into Denver. And you're supposed to feel bad about that if you're woke because they're only 9.2% black. But I think the issue at the moment, of course, was the voting rights issue, and he was wrong on that one as well. He started off his tweet by pointing out that in Georgia, they have voter ID. That's true. It's required now. And 17 days of early voting still permitted under this new restrictive bill. Whereas Colorado also has voter ID and only has 15 days of early voting allowed. So that's 2 more days in Georgia. So by rights, if you're really for more early voting, then you should want the All-Star Game to be in the state where they have more early voting. That was the argument. And it was pretty much destroyed by anyone who addressed it yesterday. And there's a Washington Post piece that does it very nicely, and we might as well borrow their collected thoughts. The unserious comparisons between Colorado's voting laws and Georgia's new one. You can actually do it in about 5 seconds. But Aaron Blake does, I think, probably a pretty good job of doing it. From the moment Major League Baseball pulled its All-Star Game out of Georgia over the state's new voting law, conservative defenders of the law have predicted impending hypocrisy. They have spotlighted certain provisions of the law that, while adding new restrictions, leave Georgia within the mainstream of how other states conduct their elections, including some blue ones. They ask what would happen if and when Major League Baseball moved the game to a state with similar laws. And then they went and did it, according to them. And so now they think they gotcha. And I think I saw Fox News pose the question, and the White House, Jen Psaki, batting it down pretty well. I mean, the substance of her answer was terrific. The delivery of the answer, once you see it on video, it's like, well, it's a lot. It's, it's better than anything you've seen out of the White House in a long time. But it's like delivering it on the show here. A little, and another thing, So like a normal person, essentially. But when it's down on paper, it's really solid. So that's why we're borrowing from Aaron Blake here, instead of just winging it. Major League Baseball has now chosen its replacement city, and its critics are trying too hard to make the attack work. The All-Star Game will now be in Denver, and some on the right quickly noted that Colorado has a voter ID law. Voter ID was part of Georgia's proposal, too, they noted. Colorado also has 2 weeks of early voting, while Georgia will still have 17 days. But even if they were equal at 15, it would still, I'm sure, be attacked. But, it was a dumb attack from the start, and you could see it. It was just too facile right on the surface. It comes down to another false logic thing. I was responding to it like, Tim Scott has 4 limbs, and a cat has 4 limbs. Therefore, Tim Scott is a cat. No, there's a qualitative difference. And a difference in the way the limbs are structured, and, different animal entirely. The reality, as you might have guessed, is much more nuanced. When it comes to picking a state that makes voting accessible and provably so, it is very difficult to do much better than Colorado. What a good choice. I don't know if they factored that in, but if they did, good on them. If they didn't, just lucky. First, the voter ID law. Colorado has one, but it's not as stringent as many critics have suggested, or as stringent as what Georgia has already and will have once they start operating under this new law. Colorado requires voter ID to vote in person, either a driver's license, an IRS-issued ID card, a valid passport, or a valid employee card with a photo, said Matt Whitlock, a spokesman for the National Republican Senatorial Committee. Major League Baseball better be ready to explain why this is more acceptable than Georgia after that absurd political statement, says Whitlock. Well, there's an explanation. And he does note here, Aaron, that many others echoed the point. Lots of Twitter examples of it. I gave you Tim Scott. There are more. It's not that difficult to explain, though. Colorado has what the National Conference of State Legislatures calls a non-strict voter ID law for in-person voting only. Voters can produce a number of different types of ID, including ones without photos. And if they don't have ID, they can vote via provisional ballot, at which time elections officials are charged with verifying their eligibility. Georgia's in-person ID requirement, by contrast, is a strict law requiring photo ID. And if a voter doesn't have one, they can cast a provisional ballot, but then they still have to produce the photo ID to a county registrar within 3 days. But this is also somewhat apples to oranges. voter ID laws at issue in Georgia are not for in-person voting, the one that's at issue in this new law. It's for mail-in voting. Georgia is going to require a driver's license number, social security number, or other ID on absentee ballots, provisions that some allege may disenfranchise black voters, but I think it'll disenfranchise a lot of voters, because if you take a look at it, by the way, somebody posted an example of a Georgia driver's license, and apparently the law is you got to put the driver's license number on your absentee ballot application, except there are two very long numbers on the face of a Georgia driver's license, and it's not entirely clear at first glance which is the one they're talking about. But you can be sure, because we'll tell you that this is the case, the Georgia law takes that into account and says if you put the wrong one, you don't get your ballot. It's invalid and you can't vote because you chose the wrong 9-digit number that is prominently displayed on the face of your driver's license. Womp womp. Where's my trombone? There you go. Right. So you put the wrong one on, you don't get to vote. But if you just show up and vote, all you have to do is stand in line for 8, 10, 12 hours and not drink any water. But no problem. Then you don't have to figure out which one it is. And what do you know? That's an easy thing to do for most white voters in Georgia and a terribly difficult thing to do in densely packed urban areas where there are lots of minority voters. What a weird coincidence. It's almost as if they know how voting works there. So anyway, you got to put the social security number or driver's license number or something else. I guess you could put your social security number if you feel comfortable writing that down and mailing it to somebody these days. Colorado sometimes requires ID to vote by mail, but only when someone casts a mail ballot for the first time. And again, the list of acceptable ID is significantly broader. The comparison between Colorado's in-person ID requirement and Georgia's new absentee ID requirement mostly falls short, though for one other main reason. Colorado conducts its elections almost entirely by mail. All registered voters receive absentee ballots automatically, and as many as 99% of people who vote use that option. I think it was 94% in the last presidential election. This also plays into the comparison between the number of in-person early voting days in each state, which Tim Scott was highlighting on Tuesday, right? Well, Colorado only offers 15 days of early voting versus the 17 that Georgia allows. Yes, but you don't need as many if everybody in the state automatically gets the option to vote by mail and gets a ballot sent to them. They can mail it. Gee whiz, I only have 15 days to fill out this thing at home. Well, I have 17 if I live in Georgia, but I don't. In Georgia, the 17 days is for you to get your ass out to the polls and stand in long lines if you happen to be unlucky enough to live in one of those areas where they've intentionally created those long lines. That's what you have 17 days to do versus 15 days to say, when I'm home, I'll fill it out and mail it in. So, Colorado has slightly fewer early voting days than Georgia, but given how few people use that option and how accessible mail-in voting is, it's incontrovertible that it's easier to vote in Colorado. Colorado has regularly been hailed as a beacon in voting law areas anyway, and many other things. It's a nice place, right? Not only does it routinely rank among the states with the highest turnout, nearly 87% of registered voters voted in 2020, 75.5% of all eligible voters, but it has also got one of the safest systems in the country, if not the safest. Turnout depends on a lot of things, including voter interest, but it's difficult to argue that a state that is ranked number 2 in turnout in 2020, even as many other states expanded their mail-in voting, is somehow comparable to a state with significantly lower turnout that is adding restrictions. That is a very dumb comparison to make. The thing about these laws is it's easy to cherry pick particular versions and provisions that make your case, and that's clearly been happening in recent days, especially given the corporate backlash from Major League Baseball and large Georgia-based employers like Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. But doing so often glosses over plenty of complexities and ignores other more controversial aspects of the bill. Like, for instance, it ignores the stated justifications for many of these proposed laws that they are meant to address concerns about election legitimacy, which is effectively an outgrowth of former President Donald Trump's big lie that the 2020 election was stolen from him via massive voter fraud. Georgia also scrapped some even more controversial restrictions that had passed in the state House and the state Senate, including limiting Sunday early voting, which is big for black churches, and getting rid of no-excuse absentee balloting. Republicans have turned to arguing that this is about streamlining the process rather than restricting the vote. But many of their efforts and comments belie that. It's true that many states, including blue ones, have provisions that are somewhat similar to the ones in Georgia's new law in some cases. There is a valid debate about just how restrictive the watered-down Georgia bill is and whether it's worthy of the corporate backlash, but those other states haven't moved to add new restrictions using a disinformation campaign as a predicate. Although I think you could probably argue that they did. And to claim Colorado is somehow similar to Georgia when it comes to ease of voting just isn't a serious allegation. But it made it all the way around the world yesterday anyway. So there you have it. Anyway, in case you wanted a really good, comprehensive, and thought-out version of the objections, you can always turn there. All right, let's see. Other things I wanted to share with you before we wind up for the day. Oh, short hit I happened to put away the other day from a tweeter, I think previously unknown to me, but Elizabeth Jacobs, PhD, as she holds herself out here, an epidemiologist, and you want to listen to them when it comes to stuff about the pandemic. But this is an angle I didn't know that we would be revisiting. But, well, she puts it pretty plainly here. Politicians, and let's be honest, I know which politician we're talking about here. It's Donald Trump. Told us repeatedly that lockdowns for the pandemic, especially in the early days, remember, lockdowns were causing increased numbers of deaths by suicide. You remember that claim? You can't have the cure be worse than the disease. People are committing suicide. It's a terrible, terrible thing. I mean, it is a terrible thing when they commit suicide, but they, claim was that, millions of Americans are contemplating suicide because of the depression brought on by staying home all the time. Well, Elizabeth says, we kept asking to see the data, and guess what? It wasn't there. Now we have it, and apparently, you'll never believe it, this was not true. Was it true that people were committing suicide in vastly increased numbers?
No!
No, not at all, says sound effects guy. Right.
Wrong, sir. Wrong.
It was wrong. It was a lie. There's another sound effect for that.
Liar! Liar! Liar!
Pretty true. All right. Well, anyway, now we have the data, and apparently it's not true. In 2020, deaths by suicide were, in fact, lower than in the previous 3 years. So not only was it just not like staying the same, and I'm lying about vastly increased numbers of suicides, there were fewer than ever before. Well, not ever before. The last 3 years. What am I saying? I'm exaggerating here. But look, if the numbers go down, you can't lie and say they've doubled. That's just nonsense. But only Trump could, think that that was worth doing. And no one will hold him accountable for it. So what the hell? Speaking of being held accountable for things, one other thing that I haven't made note of yet, but that was a big story yesterday. Did I not put it anywhere? Lynn Patterson. Is that right? Is that her name? I'm trying to do this off the top of my head here. Although I think I got a note about this earlier today from Justice, so I can double check there. Right? Patton. Lynn Patton, is that her name? Okay. Anyway, she was the HUD Region 2 official, the New York metropolitan area HUD official, Housing and Urban Development, who was, I think, as I recall correctly, she was the one who was, her big skill that she brought to the table. She was the wedding planner for Eric Trump's wedding and maybe another of the Trump's weddings. And whatever will make her Housing and Urban Development official because she's loyal to the Trump family. And guess what? She's black, so HUD, right? Just like they were like, well, we got a brain surgeon who's black. What can we do with that guy? Surgeon General, Health and Human Services? No, Housing and Urban Development, because that's a black thing. That's the way the Trump operation worked. And a wedding planner, but black, so HUD. Anyway, apparently, well, we knew from a while back that she was one of the Trump schemers and was a frequent violator of the Hatch Act. That didn't apparently matter very much during the Trump administration. But because she's not a Trump and a relatively lower level than cabinet level or inside the White House level, where people were violating the Hatch Act all the time, they have decided that they will actually be holding her accountable for that. She's in trouble, and let's see, what does it amount to? We'll put her name here and just grab a story, though it's probably available at Daily Kos by now. I'm sure I saw it written about, but quick grab from Washington Post, because it's easy. Lynn Patterson agreed to a $1,000 fine. I'm sure that's not a huge imposition for her. She stole plenty. And is barred from federal employment for 4 years. Like, that's a nice thing to finally see. Trump HUD official discipline for violating federal law. So it's out there and it's a real thing. Why aren't others being held accountable? I don't know whether they just haven't gotten around to it or the circumstances weren't quite as obvious as hers. Of course, Trump could be taken to task on the same subject, but everyone made a big deal out of pointing out, and it's true, that I guess the president and in some cases maybe other high-level operatives exempt from the Hatch Act, because it's very difficult for somebody who embodies the head of the party and the running the country to separate the two all the time. It's kind of actually a sensible exemption. But anyway, I wanted to make mention of the fact that that was out there. Let's see. Other things to add. Well, we could wrap up with this one. I wasn't going to have a chance to read all the way through this. I'll read you the piece here in USA Today, which is nice and interesting. I'm finally done with the Senate filibuster. We're running out of time to save democracy, says Noah Bookbinder, who claims in his piece that this is something he had to be brought around to agreeing to after many years of defending the filibuster. He is a former criminal prosecutor for the Justice Department's Public Integrity Section, an executive director of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, and apparently it took him some time to get around to it. I'll give you some flavor for what he has to say here, but we won't get all the way through it. This sounds apocalyptic and maybe a little crazy. It's not. That is, we're running out of time to save democracy. The Trump presidency showed how quickly and completely our foundations can be shaken. You already have an innate understanding of this, but I like the way he puts it. I worked as counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee for 8 years, he starts out with. I heard senators that I admired repeat the apocryphal story of George Washington supposedly explaining to Thomas Jefferson that the Senate was the saucer that cools the tea, preventing the House from rushing through ill-advised legislation. While the filibuster was not a part of the framers' plan, we know all about that, and indeed some of the framers warned against the supermajority requirement for legislation, it seemed consistent with this idea of the Senate as an intended obstacle to tyranny by a bare partisan majority. Perhaps more importantly, I saw cycles of control in the Senate, and I saw how the tactics of delay and obstruction that drove a majority party crazy one year were lifelines when that party ended up in the minority the next. Those seemed like compelling arguments to keep the Senate filibuster, so I passionately resisted the idea of eliminating it for years. Too slowly, perhaps, it has become clear to me that times have changed. The old arguments are no longer enough. In fact, our democracy might not survive at all unless Congress passes reforms that a minority seems determined to block. You know what we're talking about. The Senate must get rid of the filibuster in order for us to maintain a democratic system of government going forward, and the sooner the better. Well, that's pretty stark, right? Our democracy already teetered on the brink when Donald Trump, who lost the 2020 presidential election by more than 7 million votes and a substantial margin in the Electoral College, falsely and repeatedly claimed to have won, and then actually tried to convince officials in multiple states to overturn the results of the voting in those states. When efforts by Trump and his supporters to undermine and overturn the election failed, Trump's supporters switched to a quieter, believe it or not, but no less dangerous tactic. Bills have now been introduced in 47 states. It's not just Georgia. To restrict access to voting. And this doesn't even discuss, to this point, the insurrection on January 6th. They're talking about the quiet thing. 47 states now introducing bills to restrict access to voting, curbs which will disproportionately impact non-white voters. Many of these bills are on their way to passing. Efforts are also in the planning stages to aggressively gerrymander districts to benefit the former president's party. The cumulative effect of all of this is to prevent a mostly white minority of Americans from losing control of the United States government. There is legislation that could prevent this, but it looks like it'll be blocked in the Senate by the filibuster, something that has often happened to bills meant to advance racial equity and justice. Now, the combination of systematic disenfranchisement of black and brown voters, aggressive use of gerrymandering, and a system of unchecked money in political campaigns could allow a minority of voters to ensure that those who supported Trump's abuses are ushered into control of Congress and the presidency. And, of course, once in power, they've already shown their willingness to use it to further degrade checks and balances for their own advancement. The democracy, as we know it, might begin to crumble. We need, of course, H.R. 1 in order to block this from happening. This might sound apocalyptic and crazy, but it's not. And you only need to look at the 4 years of Trump's presidency, moving from emoluments violations, obstruction of investigation, embrace of white supremacists, sidelining of watchdogs and prosecutors who threatened him, and full-scale attempts to overturn the election in incite insurrection. To see where this is going.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Walton.
All right, well, you get the idea, and of course, clearly we are out of time, but you know who's not out of time? He's got a whole hour coming to him. West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam coming up next. Let's see, of course, we'll be talking about the GOP's new position on insisting that corporations have to shut up and give them money, but that and much more from around the country and around the world. Next.